Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, April 24th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. Let's start with the weather for Riverside. Expect a high today reaching 67.2 degrees Fahrenheit, cooling down to a low of 55.6 degrees later tonight. It should be a relatively mild spring day. Coming up on the show, we're examining international trade tensions as we delve into Beijing's perspective, explaining why they consider recent U.S. tariff talks to be completely groundless. Then, closer to home, we'll unpack the nuances within the Democratic Party regarding housing policy, exploring why there isn't universal support for rapidly expanding housing construction. We'll bring you the context behind these stories. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We begin this morning, April 24th, 2025, with sharply contrasting messages coming out of Washington and Beijing regarding the ongoing trade dispute. For more on this, we turn to our news reporter, Ethan. Ethan, what is the latest development?
Grace, the big news today is a very firm denial from China regarding claims of ongoing trade negotiations with the United States. China's Ministry of Commerce spokesman, He Yadong, stated quite clearly that any assertions about active talks are, in his words, quote, groundless, end quote.
Groundless? That directly contradicts what President Trump suggested recently, doesn't it? He seemed to indicate talks were happening.
It absolutely does. President Trump was quoted saying, quote, everything is active, end quote, regarding the talks, and even mentioned potentially reducing a high tariff rate substantially. But today, He Yadong, according to reporting from multiple outlets including ABC News and CNBC, said there are, quote, absolutely no negotiations, end quote, underway right now. Perplexity analysis highlighted some vivid language used by He, describing the claims of progress as, quote, groundless as trying to catch the wind, end quote. Seems the trade winds are certainly blowing cold today.
Trying to catch the wind. So if there are no talks, what is China saying needs to happen for dialogue to even begin?
Beijing has laid out clear preconditions. Based on reports from ABC News, CNBC, and KIRO 7 News Seattle, China is insisting that the United States must first, quote, cancel all the unilateral measures on China, end quote, before any substantive talks can commence. Furthermore, they emphasize that any future discussions must be conducted on the basis of, quote, mutual respect and equality, end quote, and proceed through, quote, equal consultations, end quote, essentially ruling out negotiations under pressure.
And by unilateral measures, we're talking primarily about the tariffs imposed during the trade disputes that flared up under President Trump's first term?
Exactly, Grace. China has long viewed those tariffs as illegitimate unilateral actions, as noted by KIRO 7 and Perplexity. Their stance isn't entirely new, but this explicit denial of asterisk any current talks is a direct pushback against President Trump's recent comments, especially his mention of potentially lowering a 145% tariff figure.
That 145% figure certainly catches the eye. Is that an across-the-board tariff on all Chinese goods coming into the U.S.?
That's a crucial point, and thanks for asking. Analysis from Perplexity clarifies that this 145% number doesn't represent an average tariff burden. Instead, it signifies a asterisk peak rate applied selectively to a specific, limited subset of goods. We don't have an exhaustive list, but past high tariffs, including some implemented by the Biden administration in 2024, have targeted items like solar cells, lithium-ion EV batteries, steel, aluminum, and certain medical equipment. Major consumer goods, like cell phones and computers, have often been excluded from the highest rates. So it's targeted, not universal. And let's not forget, KIRO 7 points out China has its own retaliatory tariffs reaching up to 125% on certain U.S. products. E-to-S quite the tariff I see tangle.
A selective, but still potentially very impactful rate. Has the U.S. administration responded specifically to China's denial today?
As of this morning, Grace, Perplexity indicates there hasn't been an official response from the White House, President Trump, or the Treasury Department directly addressing China's statement that talks are groundless and their demand for tariff cancellation. It is worth noting, however, that previous statements from the U.S. Treasury Secretary had indicated no formal negotiations were occurring, which might slightly align with China's assertion, though it contrasts with the president's more optimistic tone about activity.
It sounds like there's a lot of history feeding into this current standoff.
There certainly is. KIRO7 reminds us that during earlier rounds, Trump offered other countries tariff pauses for negotiations, but China was notably excluded. In response over the years, China hasn't just used retaliatory tariffs. They've restricted exports of vital rare earth minerals and filed complaints against the U.S. at the World Trade Organization. Adding another layer, CNBC reports that China has also cautioned other countries against making deals with the U.S. that could disadvantage Beijing. The economic consequences are real too, with CNBC noting several Wall Street banks have reportedly lowered their China GDP growth forecasts, citing the trade conflict.
Yet, despite all this friction and China's firm denial today, President Trump recently sounded hopeful about relations.
That's the other side of the coin. According to both ABC News and KIRO7, even while talking tough on tariffs, saying they wouldn't hit zero but could be cut, quote, substantially, end quote, from that 145% peak, President Trump also stated he would be, quote, very nice, end quote, to Chinese President Xi Jinping. So we're seeing these conflicting signals, strong denials from Beijing, preconditions for talks, alongside optimistic personal tones and tariff threats from Washington.
A very complex diplomatic picture indeed. Thanks for clarifying those details and navigating the conflicting reports for us this morning, Ethan.
You're welcome, Grace. Always a pleasure.
We're turning now to a major debate brewing within the Democratic Party, particularly out west, over a fundamental need: housing. It seems the push for more homes, what some call the abundance agenda, is hitting some roadblocks, even within the party itself. Joining us to break down this complex issue is our news reporter, Chloe. Chloe, California seems to be ground zero for this discussion right now.
That's right, Grace. California is really grappling with this, and a key piece of legislation, Senate Bill 79 or SB 79, is highlighting the internal divisions. Authored by State Senator Scott Wiener, it's called the Abundant and Affordable Homes Near Transit Act.
Abundant and affordable sounds good on paper. What exactly would SB 79 do?
According to reporting from Cal Matters and analysis by Perplexity API, the core idea is to boost housing construction near major public transit stops, what's known as transit-oriented development, or TOD. Essentially, it would require cities to allow denser housing projects near transit, overriding some local zoning rules that often restrict building. It sets standards for things like building height and density, and even exempts some projects from the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, which is the state's main environmental review law that can sometimes slow down development.
So streamline the process near bus and train lines. Has it made any progress?
It has. SB 79 actually passed the Senate Housing Committee just 2 days ago, on April 22nd, with a solid 6-2 vote, as Perplexity API reported. Its next stop is the Senate Local Government Committee, scheduled for a hearing on April 30th Theta, just 6 days from today, April 24th.
But you mentioned resistance type within the party. If it passed committee, where's the friction?
Well, the committee passage doesn't tell the whole story. A Cal Matters article, which sparked discussion over on Reddit's politics forum, really dug into this. The Senate Housing Committee chair herself, Aisha Wahab, who is described as a staunch progressive, seems to embody this tension. Analysis from Perplexity API indicates that while the bill passed her committee, Senator Wahab has expressed significant skepticism about state streamlining efforts like SB 79.
Skepticism in what way?
Perplexity notes she's voiced concerns that these kinds of bills can be, quote, giveaways to developers, end quote, questioning if they truly lead to affordable housing and pushing back against things like reducing parking requirements. She seems to favor approaches that emphasize more local control and stronger affordability mandates, baked into projects. This puts her somewhat at odds with the more aggressive pro-development wing of the party, often called YIMBYs, that stands for Yes in My Backyard, who want to build much more housing, faster, especially near transit.
So a fundamental disagreement on how best to construct a solution, you could say. Is this resistance just at the state level?
Not entirely. We see echoes locally too. For instance, the Mountain View Voice reported that the city of Mountain View recently decided against supporting a different state bill related to something called the Builder's Remedy, which is a legal tool developers can sometimes use to push housing projects through, even if they face local opposition. It shows local governments are also wary of state mandates.
And stepping back, how does this California situation fit into the national picture?
Nationally, there's a huge need. Information discussed on Reddit highlights a severe shortage, estimated at 7.1 million homes, just for extremely low-income renters across the country. While some Democratic states, like Massachusetts, are trying ambitious things, a proposed $6.2 billion plan involving converting commercial properties, even they might hesitate on certain revenue tools. And crucially, federal support looks shaky.
Shaky how?
That same Reddit discussion pointed to potential federal funding cuts for transportation, housing, and urban development, the TFED, possibly $4.4 billion less than 2024 levels. That could really hurt low-income housing programs and even eviction protections. The Mountain View Voice also noted that Santa Clara County, right there in Silicon Valley, is worried about losing funding for emergency housing vouchers. It really shows how interconnected federal and local efforts are.
It sounds incredibly complex, Chloe, with competing priorities, even within the same party.
It really is, Grace. As of today, April 24, 2025, Democrats, especially in places like California, are definitely pushing housing bills forward, but there's significant internal debate about the tundra's best way to do it. The abundance push is meeting real resistance from those prioritizing local control, deep affordability, and tenant protections. Add in local pushback and federal funding worries, and it's clear the party isn't quite marching in lockstep on housing just yet. They're still trying to lay the foundation for a unified approach.
A very challenging foundation to build, it seems. Chloe, thank you for laying out all those details for us.
You're welcome, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. In Ukraine, a major Russian strike hit Kyiv overnight on April 23rd, marking one of the most significant attacks on the capital since last summer. At least 9 people were killed and over 70 injured, including 6 children, with dozens requiring hospitalization. Russian forces used a combination of attack drones and ballistic missiles, launching at least 45 drones targeting residential areas and other districts. Rescue operations continued through yesterday morning as crews searched the rubble. Other regions, including Zhytomyr, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, and Zaporizhia, were also targeted. Ukrainian officials noted the attack comes amid stalled peace negotiations. Tensions have escalated sharply between India and Pakistan following a militant attack in Kashmir last year that killed over 24 Indian tourists in Pahalgam. India alleges the group responsible has links to Pakistan, a claim Pakistan denies. In retaliation, India has revoked all visas for Pakistani nationals, giving them 48 hours to leave the country, expelled military advisors from the Pakistani High Commission, suspended the Indus Waters Treaty pending action against cross-border terrorism, and closed the Atari border checkpoint. Pakistan has responded by halting all trade with India, closing its airspace to Indian-owned and operated airlines, and canceling SAARC scheme visas for Indian nationals. Tesla's brand reputation and financial performance have seen a rapid decline in early 2025. The electric vehicle maker reported a staggering 71% year-over-year profit plunge for the first quarter, alongside a 20% drop in vehicle sales. Total revenue missed expectations. This downturn coincides with CEO Elon Musk's political work through the Doge government initiative, which some investors believe has alienated potential buyers. Used Teslas are flooding secondary markets, global sales have slumped, and the company rescinded its 2025 guidance. Several major financial firms have lowered their price targets for Tesla stock, citing leadership concerns. President Trump is set to hold a rally in Macomb County, Michigan, next Tuesday to mark the first 100 days of his second term in office. Macomb County, north of Detroit, is an automotive hub and was a key area in Trump's narrow 2024 victory in the state. The rally is expected to focus on his economic agenda, particularly tariff policies aimed at protecting American industries. This event follows the president's first foreign trip of his second term, where he attended Pope Francis's funeral in Rome. In New Jersey, firefighters continue to battle the Jones Road wildfire, which ignited Tuesday afternoon in Barnegat Township and spread rapidly through parts of Ocean County. By last night, the fire had burned over 13,000 acres and was 50% contained, potentially making it the state's largest wildfire in 2 decades. It destroyed one commercial property, threatened other structures, and forced the temporary evacuation of 5,000 residents. Smoke from the blaze has drifted north, prompting an air quality advisory for New York City today due to expected unhealthy levels of particle pollution, posing risks for sensitive groups. No injuries have been reported. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 3.7, Gemini Pro 2.5 Experimental, Gemini Flash 2.0, Perplexity Sonar, Perplexity Sonar Pro, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.